Right, so with the main story of Murder Drones over and pretty much no hope for Season 2, my attention, as well as the attention of many other diehard fans of the show, has switched towards fandom projects. You obviously have your notable productions like Mafia Drones, Drones of the Deep, The Panic AU, and Strays, just to name a few. But there's also a metric ton of fandom fan art, small comics, and other pieces of media scattered about the various corners of the internet, and it's these that have been catching my eye recently. In my escapades through the white background, I began to notice an intriguing pattern. Yes, there was plenty of Uzi, N and V, a good amount of Tessa, and lots of Sin, but there was also something else. J. Literally everywhere. J ships, J comics, J animations, J fanfiction, J SMR. Blame totally for that one. If you can think of a piece of fan content, chances are there are at least 35 different versions of it that include J. If this were the case, as it also often is, for Uzi, Envy or Sin, I would not feel the need to point it out at all, because they're the main cast of the show. They appear in almost all of the episodes. They are the focus of Murder Drones and as such should be the focus of the fans. But as I said in my short teasing this video, J does not fall into that category. She's a side character, a semi-antagonist who's defeated in the first episode and then comes back as a sidekick to the villain in the end. So, the question I wish to answer, dear viewer, and the subject of today's video, is this. Why is the love for J by the fandom so disproportionate to her role in the show itself? To try and get the best look at this possible, we'll first go over her appearances within the 8 episodes, taking note of character interactions and overall involvement. Then we will pair these events up with the life of the fandom and see how it's influenced Jane into the position of stardom that she finds herself in. Finally, we will hear from resident YouTubers in the massive Discord server I'm in who also happen to have a particular passion for this fictional robot. Let's begin. The pilot is actually a very good place to start in terms of J, as it's arguably her most important role in the whole series. This is before the Absolute Solver, before Sin and everything that entails. It is simply a story of worker drones trying to survive the Murder Drones. In this little self-contained story, J is our primary antagonist. Set up at about the midway point of the episode, she's constructed to be a stereotypical business-first employee of the company that's assumed at this point to be the overarching enemy. We see that she has complete no-tolerance policy for anyone who doesn't strictly follow instructions and is obsessed with efficiency, thus making the incompetent N a prime target for belittling and abuse. Speaking of abuse, J does a lot of that. She verbally and physically threatens N in her introduction and has no qualms with mutilating the bodies of the workers she kills. She openly tells N that the only reason she hasn't killed him yet is because of the company's rule that forbids it, and when N does something to allow her to harm him without breaking any rules herself, she jumps at the opportunity. When confronted by Uzi and N during the climax, J's first instinct is to mock their attempts at rebellion. Even up to the point where Uzi has a gun pointed at her face, daring her to make another move, she still goes directly against her threat and pays the price for doing so. Working off this, we can see that J is set up to be very dislikable indeed. She's a bold-faced narcissist combined with the bratty corporate rules lawyer. Two character types that are almost universally hated, which is why they make up so many of the fake Reddit stories you find on YouTube Shorts. But J is one of the main characters in this episode, second only to Uzi and N, so I would be in no position to say that any fan appreciation for her at this point would be unwarranted. It's here that we get our first clue as to why J is still such a mainstay in the fandom despite her lack of appearances later on. The gap between the pilot and Heartbeat was long. Over a year in fact, far longer than the gap between any other 2 episodes. And as we can see happening now post episode 8, when there's a lack of official content for an extended period, fans will step in to do the work themselves. With J filling the slot as the third main cast member instead of V in this case, she received a fair amount of this unusual fandom attention. Art and memes of her became pretty commonplace, and thus the audience at the time grew to see her as an integral part of the show, even with her death in the episode itself. One thing about the human mind that is very fascinating to me is its ability to locate and fixate on patterns, and I believe that's what happened here. In the minds of fans, much of the content surrounding Murder Drones is J. Therefore, the brain builds a pathway that associates J heavily with Murder Drones, and as we'll see later, Glitch stimulates that pathway just enough to keep it open so the audience doesn't realise the lack of an impact she's having on the show proper. However, this is only for the fans of the show pre-full season announcement. For new fans, we have to look a little further into the show to find some answers. The answers I'm looking for won't be found in episode 2 though, because Heartbeat does something rather odd with J. Not character-wise, but in the sense of picking up and mutilating her corpse. As a quick reminder for anyone who hasn't watched the series in a while, J's death acts as the catalyst for the activation of the Absolute Solver, shown here to simply be a backup program designed to collect more matter to reconstruct the drones. Or at least that's the claim. We're shown mountains of metal up in the ceiling and in the final act of this episode, but they never actually get around to putting J back together. It's this fact that makes the audience skeptical as to whether or not that is the Solver's true intentions, as we see throughout the episode that it is very good at deception and has no problem lying to us. The writing choice builds up the Solver as the primary antagonist, but also heavily diminishes J's value as an individual character. She's now more or less a plot device to prop up the actual villain. As the Solver says itself,
J's not here.
J is no longer here. She no longer is the focus. But yet again, I could still give a pass for the amount of attention Jay gets at this point. V is barely in the episode either, and she was less influential in the pilot than Jay was. But unlike Jay, V is given a major lift in our next episode. The promenade is where we can really establish our main cast of Uzi, N, and V, with Jay not showing up until literally the last 10 seconds of the episode. And this isn't even our Jay. She's a clone without the memories from the pilot, a clone who only has records of what N did and a vague warning about staying away from the railgun. Sure, she may act the same and look the same, but this is not our Jay. Her reintroduction also comes with another major problem that I touched on in my villains video a while back. By bringing Jay back from the dead at seemingly no cost, you remove most of the stakes surrounding death in the show. A very bad thing for a production with murder in the name. While for the life of me I can't find the image, there was a meme that summed this up perfectly, posted around this time, of a shelf full of Jays waiting to be used in the future. This one action should have removed a lot of the fanfare around Jay, as she is now a far less concrete character. But regardless of my retrospective logic, the fandom found new life for Jay, because like I said, there is that little bit of stimulus to the pathway in the brain, allowing old fans of Jay from the pilot a chance to gush over her inclusion regardless of its impacts on the story and world. Several fans will also still see Jay as the true third main character at this point, due to this being the first episode where V is really seen as central to the story rather than as an accessory to develop N. That's why a simple Google search for Murder Drones Prom Jay will yield hundreds of pieces of artwork, many taking heavy inspiration from the design of V's dress in the episode, perhaps only changing the colour to black or messing with the shape slightly. It's here that I must bring up another concept that you've probably thought of the second you clicked on this video. Simping. Oh god, simping. I'm not going to explain the concept of simping to you guys because we've all been on the internet for long enough and I don't fancy the strange looks I'd get from my parents if I did, but in essence, ever since the release of the pilots there were people simping for Jay. Glitch made robots with exaggerated proportions for a reason and the audience bought straight into it. Jay and V are also the only characters in the whole show that demonstrate this sort of odd semi-sexual appeal, with the other characters being cylinders or shadows. Yes, Spacesuit Tessa could also sort of fit into this category, but she's not the one with straps on her legs or thigh-high stockings. And if the power of repetition was strong enough to keep Jay in the minds of fans, then oh boy does the power of lust have the ability to lodge itself deep inside the brain forever. Like it or not, the brain is hardwired around mating, and anything even remotely attractive will have the grass-deprived people of the internet on their knees. No, wait, that sounds horrible. You know what, I'm just moving on from this subject. For episode 4, there's really nothing to talk about. After a big reintroduction in the last episode, we see literally nothing from Jay or Tessa in Cabin Fever. In a similar fashion to the promenade, Camp Guide Jay was relatively easy to find in the fan art community, but support for Jay was gradually beginning to weaken. Which brings us to the runt of the Murder Drones litter, the forgotten middle child. Home. Home is a weird episode in the context of this video because it does feature Jay, the original Jay from the pilot but in worker form, quite heavily, at least in comparison to the last 2 episodes we've seen. But unlike the pilot, in this episode Jay never really gets the chance to take the spotlight due to the presence of Tessa, who is with her in quite literally every shot. Tessa is by far the most imposing character in the show. She dominates every scene she's in, especially in episode 5 where her and Crozy are the 2 main characters. The fact that this is the case is a major criticism of the layout of Home as an episode, because it completely fails to deliver on its initial promise, but that's a criticism for another video and another time. For now, let's talk about what we do get from Jay here. Home gives Jay what she really hasn't had up until this point in the series, which is a genuine friend. As mentioned before, her ideals immediately put her at odds with N, and V is at most a colleague to her. In fact, she only says one line directly to V in the pilot, and it's a dig at N.
Synergistic liability here must have tripped and knocked himself offline.
Giving Jay a true friend in Tessa helps to open up her character and expose some different parts of her personality. We see that she is loyal to her fault, willing to put herself in harm's way for Tessa, and is understanding of her pain and willing to work around it. Finally get something positive to say about this character after more than half of the show. But as Sensei Wu so eloquently put it, you cannot have light without darkness, and that darkness comes in the form of her treatment towards Sin. At this point in the story, we're given no indication that Jane knows what Sin really is, so it's safe to assume that she can only see the surface level character of a disabled drone. Jay's decision then on how to best handle her is to lock her in the basement and throw away the key. If you really think about it, which nobody does given the ending of the episode, that is really fucked up. Like serious red flags here. Thankfully for Jay's legacy, no Twitter mobs came storming in, and the comment was quickly brushed under the rug by all the other criticisms of this episode. Along with those criticisms came a shift in the representation of Jay versus the rest of the cast that really inspired me to write this video. While Crozy was heavily disliked, N was limited to essentially a bird stand, V wasn't even conscious the whole time, and the solver itself is very hard to draw. Jay and Tessa stood alone as the fandom's fixation surrounding this episode. This was also helped by the fact that a brand new style of outfits was made for people to copy copy onto their own OCs and other characters. The maid drone dress in particular was a very popular choice for fan artists, a dress that Jay was the most prominent wearer of. Moving away from Earth and back to Copper 9, Jay now holds a very minor role in episode 6, once again being overshadowed by Tessa. She confirms to the audience that drones can be cloned and then spends the rest of the episode sitting in the surface doing basically nothing. The change in treatment towards Jay by the character we assume to be Tessa acts as another red flag to the fact that we're dealing with Sin, a character Jay has a poor history with and not the real human, but that's about all she's good for here. We then get another decently long break between episodes as a certain circus of the digital variety took over the internet. It's actually important that we talk about this here because it let the view count of episodes 5 and 6 go from 7 million to 20 million in a week, which is a lot of new fans coming to the show. Many of these digital circus migrators have one thing in common, a liking towards the character of Jax, a narcissistic asshole who puts himself before others constantly and abuses those who won't defend themselves. Sound familiar? If Digital Circus were to be released after, say, Cabin Fever, there would be no way Jay would be as popular among fans as she is now, simply because she wasn't present in the episode. But because she is in episode 6 as well as in 7, even if only for a little bit, they can still be introduced to her and see that familiar personality. I'm going to skim over episode 7 here as it's very similar to 6 and what Jay is used for. She spends her time doing a side quest to fetch the ship in order to reintroduce Khan, Dad and Lizzie to the story, and doesn't do much else. There were some speculations at this time that she was going to rescue V, but that obviously didn't pan out as we see in episode 8. Absolute End grants Jade just a little bit more screen presence, but with the caveat that she is once again glued to another character who tells her what to do. Choosing to ally herself with the Absolute Solver is a final display of Jay as a true villain in the story, who always looks out for herself, even if she knows what she's doing isn't the right thing to do from a moral standpoint.
It tricked you! If I promised you anything, you tricked me too.
She's not completely heartless, offering V, a drone that she views as effective, a chance to join her and be spared by the Solver. But when this offer is rejected, there's no notion of sympathy or a second attempt at persuasion. She kicks V through a wall and leaves her to die. The second half of the episode, I believe, does her a little bit of a disservice, mostly because she spends the whole time getting beaten up by everyone, including the Solver, and the only real conclusion we get is the credit scene showing her repairing the ship, and that's essentially it for Jay. She's not redeemed in the dying hours of the show, she's left as a true antagonist, and ends it all as a lone wolf looking out for herself like she's always done. And I think that consistency in character may be one final reason why people like her. Sure, she's not a hero, but her motives are understandable, and she holds true to her beliefs even if they're flawed, and there is something a little noble in that. But that's enough of my thoughts. Now, let's hear from some other Jay fans on the matter.
Jay is a character who suffers from a paradox known as simping. Due to this paradox, it is extremely easy for fans to gravitate towards her and overanalyze the hell out of any and all Jay scenes. Take Home, for example. A lot of folks say that it's a good Jay episode, despite her not doing too much besides being a glorified sidekick for Tessa. The uncertainty of Jay is her appeal, because you don't know what direction her character is taking.
A quick summary of Jay from every episode to explain why I love her so much and believe if episode 8 was good then it could have made her the best written character in the series. Jay, despite being a one-sided antagonist in the pilot, fulfills her role damn near perfect, providing the series with someone to hate on, which would most likely lead to the audience rooting for N more, creating investment in the series, while having an interesting personality, not overcomplicated but not boring enough to ignore her, arguable the second funniest character in the pilot only beaten by Khan.
Smash.